Alexandria, March 415 CE. Due to fires in the city, Hypatia cannot see the stars. She had been hoping to make astronomical observations and see the wheel of the cosmos turning around the Earth. Perhaps the constellations could give her some insight into the dire events surrounding her. Her friend and ally, Governor Orestes, is practically at war with Bishop Cyril. Men have been killed in the street, tortured and banished, and now Cyril's supporters are talking. They whisper that Hypatia has poisoned Orestes against Cyril, that she practices pagan magic, and that she uses instruments like the satanic astrolabe. Though Hypatia doesn't even believe in Satan, nor God for that matter. Only the limitless, Neoplatonic one and the inexorable energies that orbit stars and planets around the Earth. Yet, it is far more mundane forces that will decide her fate. Forces that, though driven by men, were no less unstoppable. Say, are you looking for a career that can have a positive impact on the world? Then stick around until after the episode, because 80,000 hours might be able to help you find your dream job for free. One of the most frustrating things about studying Hypatia is how little we really know about her. Apart from a few surviving letters and histories written after her death, the records are extremely thin. In fact, to get any sense of her at all, historians have had to fill in the gaps by describing the world she lived in and the forces that would have shaped her life as a scholar and Neoplatonist. Even the most famous episode in her life, her horrible and unjustified murder, isn't told in a perspective directly about her. However, it is indicative of the difficult political landscape she'd have to navigate her whole life. Put simply, Hypatia was caught in a political struggle between the zealous Bishop Cyril and the newly arrived Roman governor Orestes. At its heart, their dispute was over who had the authority to make policy and enforce laws. Now, traditionally, Roman governors had unlimited authority over their provinces, but because their chief duty was to prevent unrest, many would be pragmatically lax about enforcing unpopular laws like religious codes. And that is what kicked off the cycle of violence between these two leaders. First, Orestes issued a new law, banning public mime performances and dance shows that had previously been scenes of public disorder. However, these performances were popular among the city's Jewish population, especially on their Shabbat days where options for entertainment were limited. And at one of these shows, a Cyril lieutenant showed up and, in the middle of a predominantly Jewish crowd, began to read the new law aloud. It was a provocation against both the Jewish community and Orestes, who had likely planned to enforce the law selectively. Yet here was Cyril's man, acting like he had the authority to use it as a cudgel against a religious minority. And unsurprisingly, this vigilante action provoked a scene of disorder. Troops intervened and arrested Cyril's man before things got too bad, and he was taken to Orestes, who, as governor, served as the highest judge in Alexandria. To prove a point that he, and not the bishop, enforced the laws, Orestes had Cyril's lieutenant publicly tortured in a theater, probably by whipping. Now, of course, there were other underlying reasons Orestes and Cyril didn't get along. Orestes was, it's believed, a recent convert to Christianity and had a pagan background. Moreover, he'd been baptized in Constantinople, and the Alexandrian priests were in the middle of a bitter theological feud with that city's clergy. Not to mention, their basic missions were in conflict. As bishop, Cyril saw his role as to expand Christianity, attack heretics to protect doctrinal orthodoxy, and break the political and religious power of Jews and pagans. However, pursuing that mission would cause enormous disruption in the riot-prone city of Alexandria, and Orestes' fundamental goal was to keep Egypt stable and productive. In pursuit of that, Orestes had specifically made outreach efforts toward the Jewish and pagan communities. Not only would Cyril have disliked this on religious grounds, but he also would have interpreted it as a threat. These were, after all, the same political blocs that had literally fought against his succession as bishop. And one of the most prominent allies Orestes had secured was the famed philosopher and mathematician Hypatia of Alexandria. Hypatia served as an advisor and representative of the pagan community, well known to have Orestes' ear. And no doubt he would have appreciated the advice, since he was not originally from Alexandria and didn't have the depth of knowledge Hypatia did regarding the city's restive politics. And given that modern scholars believe Hypatia was universally respected, a moral center of the city, and a symbol of cooperation between religious groups, she would have been a good ally to have. But regardless of whatever counsel Orestes got, his decision to torture Cyril's man definitely backfired. Furious at this affront, Cyril started publicly threatening to sack the Jewish quarter. In response, gangs of Alexandrian Jews, both frightened about the possibility of attack and angered over Cyril's targeting of them, decided to strike first. They sprinted through the dark streets one night, yelling that a church was on fire. Then, when the Christians left their homes to fight the blaze, the gangs fell on them and killed them indiscriminately. It was a brutal massacre. But if at that point Cyril had stepped back and let Orestes dispense justice on the criminals with state power, the conflict might have been diffused. But instead, the bishop dispatched mobs of the faithful to smash down the doors of synagogues and round up anyone believed responsible to remove them from the city. Now, ancient sources disagree whether Cyril banished only those suspected of perpetrating the attack or whether he expelled Alexandria's entire Jewish population. But either way, the action mortified Orestes. Not only had Cyril continued to act as though he were governor, he'd further inflamed tensions and drained Alexandria of just tons of people. At this point, both governor and bishop wrote letters to the emperor, blaming the other for the situation, and settled into a tense stalemate. At one point, Cyril did send a message to Orestes, proposing a reconciliation, but the governor rebuffed him, and in response, a mob of 500 monks left their monasteries and flooded the city in hopes of changing the governor's mind. They caught Orestes as he moved through the city in his chariot and surrounded him, chanting that he must reconcile with Cyril, screaming that he was a secret pagan, and that they would stone him to death. Oh, and one tried. A monk named Ammonius let a stone fly, the missile cracking into Orestes' skull and drawing bright blood, causing the governor to fall limp. It was only the intervention of Orestes' soldiers that prevented the governor from being killed in the street that day. But as the monks scattered, and the guards dragged Orestes away to safety, they also managed to pull Ammonius along with them. Now, attacking a Roman governor was an act of rebellion, and as we know, in the Roman Empire, rebels die. Orestes had Ammonius tortured to death in front of a crowd. Yet even that did not stop Cyril. After the sentence was carried out, he took charge of the monk's body and conducted his funeral in Alexandria's largest church, displaying the remains for days and naming Ammonius a martyr and saint. So at this point, I imagine you're asking, where is Hypatia in all of this madness? Well, apparently, Orestes had consulted her regularly during his standoff with Cyril, though what actual advice she gave him was unknown. She seemingly wasn't a central figure in the conflict. But then again, Cyril had lost a lot of public support after the attack on Orestes and his funeral stunt with Ammonius. He had to eventually undo that whole sainthood thing. So, maybe it was safer to attack an advisor than Orestes himself. What we know is that whether due to a smear campaign by Cyril or organic rumors, Christian partisans in Alexandria began to fixate on Hypatia as the reason these two men could not reconcile. They called her a pagan, a user of the devil's tools, and suggested that she controlled Orestes with magic. This is all sounding terribly familiar. Some historians claim Cyril personally ordered what happened next, while others argue it was likely a spontaneous event, that the crowd was simply trying to confront Hypatia and intimidate her into leaving public life, which was a common tactic in the Roman Empire that may have simply gotten out of hand. But either way, the results were horrific. March 415. Hypatia is on her daily commute through the city, having left the museum and headed home along the coastal roads. That's where the mob stops her. They surround Hypatia's chariot and drag her out. As a middle-aged woman who lived a life of scholarship, she's unable to physically oppose them. Then, they drag her into a building that Cleopatra had planned and Augustus had finished. For centuries, it had served as the center of the city's Roman cult, but had recently been converted into a church, the headquarters of Bishop Cyril. And it is there that the mob tears off her clothes and beats her. Then, taking up sharp objects, broken roof tiles, and oyster shells, they proceed to literally rip her apart, tearing the flesh from her bones. The remains of her body will be taken elsewhere and burned like those of a hated criminal. It is a murder that will echo across the Mediterranean world, as people as far as Constantinople ask, who killed Hypatia and what does her death mean? And it's these questions that we are going to explore next week, when Hypatia becomes a martyr, a tragic heroine, and even a saint. Now, if you're wondering how we can possibly transition from recounting Hypatia's horrible fate into anything else, I'm not gonna lie, I was wondering that myself. But luckily this week, we found a great group to tell you about that is helping folks make a positive impact in the world, and can help you do the same. 80,000 Hours is a nonprofit that helps folks find fulfilling careers with a strong social impact for free. And their work, based off a decade of research alongside academics at Oxford University, can help you find a job that makes a positive difference in the world doing something you love. They've got a ton of career research on their website to learn about what makes for a high-impact career, loads of decision-making tools to help you select a new impactful plan, and then to put into action what you've learned. 80,000 Hours has an amazing job board, filled with tons of actual listings based on their research. So all that together gives you the best chance of turning your job into a career that can help make the world a better place. And again, because they are a nonprofit that is philanthropically funded, there is no endgame gotcha mechanic or hidden paywalls. All their material is free, always. To get started, all you gotta do is go to 80,000hours.org/extrahistory to begin planning a career that's meaningful, fulfilling, and helps solve some of the world's most pressing problems. There you can sign up for their free in-depth newsletter and career guide that takes you through all of the steps in making the best career plan for you and your 80,000 working hours that, on average, you'll spend in your lifetime. So for impactful new job opportunities, click here, and once you've found your future, why not check out another blast from our past right here. The biggest being thanks to Angela Valenciana, Arclight Games, Dominic Valenciana, Hunter Z, Ilknerg, Izzy Coin, Joseph Blame, and Kuya Koi for being the best legendary patrons.